All right, I think we're live now with this amazing interview that I've been looking forward to because you are one of, or you're two of the most amazing global experts on erotic intelligence, and it's rare to catch you. You travel all over the world and do workshops and private sessions and private retreats and teach people all over the world. And so I'm so grateful I just captured you for an hour here so we can talk about your expertise and I can introduce you to my community of leaders, entrepreneurs, and creators. So welcome, Erin and Saida. So good to see you. So I know that you are contacted by leaders and entrepreneurs and creators all over the world, but I don't think you have made many talks about how leadership and erotic intelligence is related. But that's what I would like to talk about in this next hour, because I think it's important that we are upfront with how these two topics are related.
Yes.
And just to introduce my listeners a little bit to why I'm preoccupied about this, if we look at leadership so far, leadership in the 20th century, it's been about suppressing sexuality. So for men, it resulted in sexual abuse in the workplace. It resulted in distorted sexuality, and that's thus the whole Me Too campaign. So clearly that was not a very good idea, neither for the men or the women or anybody in between. And for the women, it's almost even more tragic, I think, because women have for centuries cut their sexuality out. It's like our whole pelvic area has been like cut and like put somewhere else than in our creative life. And after taking Saida's workshop on the jade egg, I really got in touch with how tragic this is and how much it costs us women to have our pelvic area just ignored and even suppressed and shamed in our work life. So this interview is about bringing a healthy sexuality back into our leadership. And I'd like to hear your take on why you think leadership and erotic intelligence is related. So if we start with the ladies, right, Saida, can I start with hearing your perspective on this? Because you've been working with this area for years and years. I mean, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. You've been a leading and also a really leading advocate for a healthy feminine sexuality and written a PhD about it and a book about it and taught I don't know how many courses. So thank you for your enlightening, illuminating work on this. But let me hear why do you think these two are related, both for men and women? So.
Yes, well, there's a few things. There's nothing more embodied than our sexuality, our desire. It's a primal body calling, let's say. And then in terms of leadership, right now the world is facing a coming apart of leadership. And so what is needed to move us forward as a human family is embodied leadership. So we actually cannot constructively really move forward if we don't also embody our own bodies and then lead from that place. So a lot of the programs I do for professionals is literally an embodied leadership program. Some of those are actually in South Africa on safari, and some of those are really teaching like how do we have psychosexual conversations even in the workplace, because human beings are also sexual beings, and ignoring that fact and not understanding how to harness it, we see the results of that's what we have now. So by turning our attention, having direct relationships, starting to cultivate it consciously, we actually harness an incredible creative energy that's very magnetic, it's very generative, and actually creates more safety in a community. So that's what I wanted to say about it.
Thank you so much. And what about you, Erin? How do you relate the two, leadership and erotic intelligence?
Well, the way I look at it is that if we're actually trying to, for instance, accomplish different types of goals, be it professionally or in family life, there's two ways that we can be conditioned. The way that's kind of the classic way of conditioning is being negatively conditioned, meaning that conditioned away from the things that we don't want. Or in other words, we try and avoid the stuff that we don't want. Therefore, we're going to find motivation to work because we don't want to have the negative consequences. However, the other way of dealing with conditioning is positive conditioning, which is that you are actually conditioned by the things that you want in your life, going towards the goals that you want. And this is something that's so basic and fundamental to the way that we set up our psyche that it will affect the way as well that we then go into leadership with our businesses. So if by business you're just trying to keep up with the things to avoid the catastrophe that can happen, that's not the place to make the wisest decisions from. Instead, it's actually being very in touch with the things that you do want so that you're conditioned to go towards those goals as opposed to avoiding the things that you don't want. And that creates a massive switch. And it's always interesting because I've worked with people that both want to optimize, people that want to deal with trauma, and there's a little bit of everything that everyone has to go through. But the part that is categorically surprises everybody is that it's not actually the trauma work that they felt would be the most difficult, which is dealing with the types of fears or things that were off in our past. And it's important to come in touch with those and to be able to communicate with it and to move through and become comfortable with it. But the part that always ends up scaring people the most and where they find the greatest work isn't actually in avoiding the pain or in confronting the pain from the past, but actually becoming in touch with and living with the pleasures that they actually want in their life. Because that is the part where people normally get truly scared, is when they become in touch with and see in front of their face what their human potential is. And normally you either get the feelings of, I'm ashamed because I don't feel like I deserve it, or if I indulge in it, how am I ever going to be able to stop? So actually becoming deeply in touch with one's pleasure capacity and the ability to share that with a partner in a way that you can actually trust it to lead you towards the things that you want, as opposed to getting you in trouble at like a Eula focus, for instance, then these are the very things that we want to have at the basis of our psyche, at the basis of our embodiment, because it will naturally translate into the leaders we become, helping not just ourselves move towards what we want, but our entire team.
It's really fascinating because you're addressing some of the reasons why sexuality has been so repressed. We are afraid of sexuality. That's why we don't talk about it publicly. I mean, we certainly don't want to mention it in the workplace, although it's such a big part of all of us. And it's actually, I think it's a very interesting fire that can fire up our leadership. So it's really a problem if we repress it, because then we get less fire for our leadership as well. But why are we so ashamed? I think one of the reasons, I mean, I do this interview from a Protestant country, and we're just trained to, in the cultural DNA, it's just like, we don't talk about sexuality, and that's for the private life, and it has nothing to do with our public life. And it's sort of regarded as inappropriate to bring up in a leadership conversation. I mean, it's like, I think I'm the only one here in Denmark who would do that. And I don't hear it often mentioned in leadership context. It's like, it is as if we could just put that away. Yes. So why are we so ashamed of sexuality? I mean, we are actually so fortunate. We live at a moment where all the keys for the savings of the human family is being given to us. Now they are revealed. And one of the keys that has been suppressed all over the world for so many years, for thousands of years, is sexuality. So I'd like you to talk about why that is, the power of our sexual energy. Mm-hmm. So what is it that we can access, and why has it been so suppressed?
Yes, I'll jump in.
Go
ahead. There's a few things. So when I speak about sexuality in professional settings, often I will say, let's not use that word, because when we say sexuality, we instantly jump to the act of sex. But sexuality is much bigger than just the act of sex. Sexuality is an aliveness. So who doesn't want to feel their most turned on self? When you have an innovation, an idea, a project, you want to be lit up. You want to have a lot of energy. You want to have a lot of magnetism. You want to be inspiring. All of these qualities come from the current or the energy of your sexual energy, but not always the act of it. We're not enacting sexuality all day long, but we are sitting with a very sexual body. So sometimes I change the word sexuality to aliveness. I say, let's cultivate this aliveness. How can we light each other up? And a client of mine, Barbara Marks Hubbard, taught me these words, vocational arousal. And it's a way, it's very important in the workplace that there's this coming together of our geniuses. So she was saying this concept of, it's not just about joining genes and making babies, it's about joining genius and creating innovation, and to pay attention to vocational arousal, because when you have it, it's an indication that perhaps it is an opportunity to join genius and create something that would actually really help transform the world. So it's too bad that we are afraid of this topic. But I think when we say sexuality, it instantly means sex. We become pornographic in our thought process, instead of understanding that it's actually a great source of powerful energy. And again, if we can cultivate it, have conversations about it and understand it, and in maybe its greater potential versus just the act of sex, then we can actually deal with a little bit of erotic tension that comes up in the workplace, or even excitation that can come around a project and everyone's getting really turned on, and all of these things. That's a great thing actually to harness and have leadership, proper leadership around generating more aliveness, more turn on within our team is actually only supportive, and that will go out into the world, into the message, into the product. And of course, then the customer, the people we're serving, they feel that generative energy, and now it's this cumulative, beautiful, supportive creation that happens.
Okay, so I just want to pause here and say, I'm just going to ask my audience if they now understand why I invited the two of you and not anybody else, because no, but really I'm so touched by the elevated way you can speak about this, because you can speak about it in such you take it out of the local act of making babies. It's like it's so small, the way we usually relate to sexuality, and sexuality is so big. That's why I think it has been suppressed. It's such a big life power. It's such a big maybe it's the energy resource we have harnessed the less. Mm-hmm. But it's unlimited, and its capacity is enormous, because yes, of course, when we get turned on, that's where everything happens. But I think that it needs to be coupled with what you are representing so well, this maturity, because that's one of the problems. If you have turned onness without maturity, it's like having a lot of energy without consciousness, like a 3-year-old with a knife who has no idea. It's so that's where it becomes dangerous, when you don't have any awareness about it and any consciousness about it. And I think that's what the wonderful way about the way you teach is always this mature consciousness. So it becomes very elevated somehow. It's very sober and very, I would say, refined, and it's so much larger than the just local act. So thank you for that. I love Barbara Marks Hubbard as well. Isn't she wonderful? And she's also talking about this evolutionary drive to create conscious evolution. And of course, we need our sexual energy for that. I mean, what other engine are you going to put behind?
Exactly.
So yeah. What do you say, Erin? Why do you think you've worked with thousands of women, not least, and couples as well? And I'd like you to talk about, why do you think women are it's so difficult for women with this sexuality? It's so difficult for us in many ways.
There's a large history around the kind of understanding of love and one's duty to family in the past, which was, you would marry for duty, you'd pass on the bloodline, and love is something that can pop up between anybody. And you mentioned this kind of like knife as a teenager. I mean, a lot of the metaphors that we have to understand love is that it can drive you crazy, you're head over heels in love, that it's almost like this poison and it causes you to do irrational things. There would be major consequences to your family line, to your reputation, if you'd go and have sex. And so therefore, it was never something that was very trusted and therefore repressed. It kept certain things, societies in line. It also made sure that, heritage money and things were passed on. However, now we're at a place that sex isn't just something that is functional. And we're also understanding that pleasure is something that is actually essential to a good life. It's not just sex, isn't just something that you kind of do extra on the side if you happen to find a perfect romantic match. Sex also isn't something that you do kind of in the brothels or in the dens, the kind of like that they used to do like in medieval society, where a lot of these things were separated out from your everyday life and being able to accept it. Now we actually understand that pleasure is a part of health, and we have this very strong kind of ingrained mentality from the puritanical background. My father's a pastor, and there is this kind of belief in no pain, no gain, that life is torturous and this is how we advance ourselves. And instead going, well, actually maybe we've been put on this earth with in a potential paradise, and how do we bring that about? Is it by just bringing a lot more pain and that being our sole motivator again to be able to get to where we want to go? Or is it actually that the good felt states, the pleasure, the things that we've accomplished, are those the goals again that are advancing us in that direction? And so we have an opportunity here to be able to really make pleasure as being the meditation from which our inspiration comes. Because when we're creating from a place of stress, a place of we just need to get the numbers to line up, it's a very different place than creating from a place where you are generative, a place where you are generous, and then having inspiration come to you. And this is where our great and big breakthroughs come from, is in being able to get outside of that box that we normally condition ourselves in, which is basically avoiding a certain amount of pain, as opposed to how can we nurture this as a practice, not just in ourselves, because it gives us self-responsibility when we learn how to activate our pleasure, but then in our ability to share it with our partner. And then if that can start to have this cyclical synergistic effect inside of your couplehood, then this is going to have different reverberations as it goes out into the other networks around you, because what you're doing at home, what's happening within, is going to be what's happening without.
That makes so much sense. And that makes me want to talk about, what about all the singles? Because there's many. I think it's the number of singles on the planet is increasing, and more people find it difficult to live in couplehood, or there's so many breakups now because people are in different places with everything. So what about the singles then? How do they cultivate this?
Well, I love that you asked this question, because a lot of times people have the feeling like, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to wait to work on these things until I meet the perfect person. In fact, I hope that I meet the perfect person that's so perfect, I don't have to work on it. And then they can just come along and do that for me. And I think this is part of kind of also in the Western world, there's a great book by Denis de Rougemont called Love in the Western World. And he goes into the history of romance and actually this idealization that you end up creating of the other person, which is more about being in love with love than being in love with that person. And so if you bring together this mindfulness and consciousness and sexuality, then all of a sudden you have the ability to love the person for who they are. And so how does this work for singles? It means that at the beginning, you need to be able to actually become into alignment with yourself. You need to have connection with yourself. And then from that place, you can share that with someone else. It would be like saying, well, I'm going to wait to join a sports team to start playing sports. No, you need to be physically active, get all the things down, so that way you have the skill sets within which to work within a team. And this is no different in our own personal sexual life as well as our relational sexual life, In the same way, again, in the professional life, there's all these mirrors that you might be able to work very well individually. And I think there is kind of the old model in business was very kind of cutthroat, the biggest shark would win, versus now realizing, as you mentioned, that the future is feminine, which is about connection, about being in alignment with some other greater purposes. Well, to be truly connected and in alignment with your purpose, you also have to be in alignment and in connection with yourself. And so that starts with, as a single, actually taking the time to invest in the richness that is yourself, to develop that sexual self-confidence, to then be able to share it with someone else and navigate all the ups and downs that come in a relationship.
Yes, I love
That
it.
makes so much sense. And I'm just thinking, we are in turbulent times of crisis, and everything is wobbling. It's like our foundation is wobbling. And when you talk, it awakens in me the sense that those who will be most resilient in these times of change are people who are in contact with their wholeness. I mean, I think it's just a good investment in times of crisis to invest in one's own whole and complete self, because then no matter what, at least you are standing in a much more solid way on the ground. And why I also think erotic intelligence is extremely important in leadership is because what will save us, what will get us out of all the trouble we have created for ourselves is creativity and innovation. I mean, what are we going to do without that? And people who, when we suppress our sexuality, we suppress our creative energy.
Yes.
So when that's, or it's not even, maybe not suppressed, but it's just so reduced when we are not juiced, right?
Yes, it's often we at that point are making it into a currency or a bargaining chip. And then it's very transactional. It's very unsatisfying. We see that everywhere now, with all the dating apps and everything. It's just people are very transactional, picking an item of food and then tossing it if you don't really like it. So the solo cultivation, having yourself as your best lover, your deepest beloved, is crucial to start transforming how we relate to other people. Actually, so if I don't respect myself, if I don't have a sense of joy in my own body and shamelessness and just freedom in myself, how am I going to be able to accept it in another person or even bring that out of another person? So often the model that I use is, rather than a beggar's bowl, which is what we're taught, I'm looking for my other half, you have to turn me on, you have to do this. These are all kind of expectations and limitations that we bring to a connection. Rather, solo practice, being on your own and really understanding. And you can do this in your couple as well. Each individual within the couple needs to keep cultivating themselves. Then you have the gourmet plate. And this gourmet plate is the abundance of all that you are, all the beauty, all the talent, all the different flavors that you are. And you don't bargain. You're like, here it is. I generously share it with you, but I'm not going to bargain anything. And that's a beautiful thing, because now you have a whole person meeting another whole person. And instead of the codependent games that we tend to play from this beggar's perspective, now we're like, I want to exalt you. I want you to thrive. I want you to be your most expressed self, because I want that for me. And I already have that for me because I've been cultivating that for me. And now it becomes a dynamism and something very powerful. And if you don't want to be in a strict monogamous kind of marriage type relationship structure, you don't have to. You can be a vibrant single who has beautiful lovers and is treating those lovers with deep respect and using all those different connection points to also create more thriving in the environment. So we are headed into a new paradigm for relating, for humanity, and at the same time not being afraid of intimacy and understanding that sexuality is something actually extremely beautiful and can be done very artfully to help everybody thrive more. This is an essential part of leadership for all leaders, because even if you don't run a business and you're a mother, you're leading your children. If you're a school teacher, if you're a guy who cleans the shoe, everyone is in a leadership role. We lead by who we are, what we embody. That's the only way now So without that solo cultivation, where's our leadership? It's just a conceptual leadership. It's not real.
So true. And I think that we have a problem we need to overcome when it comes to stepping into this paradigm you're talking about, and that is fear. Because there's a lot of fear around sexuality. I mean, I think in the masculine world, there's now even more fear than there has been, because of the whole Me Too movement. So I think I don't know, Aaron, maybe you can speak about that, but I would imagine that men have become a lot more afraid of doing a misstep that can offend anybody. And that, I think, would lead to men suppressing even more, and then getting an even more distorted sexuality, because suppression creates distortion. And for women, I think that there's just, I mean, if I look at the women leaders, I know there's just, and I recognize that pattern, this focus, when we're focused on something, it's like we often think that, okay, sexuality is like secondary. So I think that women also need to step out of the fear that sexuality will disturb. I mean, I just talked to a friend just before we were getting on this call, and we talked about how women are so, when we are in love and when we love, we give that so much attention. It drives us so much that we tend to forget, what was I supposed to do in my leadership? So I think that women are afraid to get distracted from their purpose by letting go and inviting in more sexual pleasure into their lives. So how do we overcome this fear that both men and women have now around sexuality? Because we're so, and also I would say intimacy is where we disclose our deepest selves. So there's also a fear of, I think fear of rejection or whatever it is. So how do you help people overcome that?
Well, it's kind of like if you go to a party, right, and you see the person over in the corner being really quiet and hiding everything and sort of like keeping very internally, they're the ones that actually stand out, and it feels very awkward then to have them there, versus someone who is social, outgoing, expressed about themselves. Then you know at least what it is that you're interacting with. And as long as we hide from our own sexuality, meaning that we don't take the time to really go into self pleasure, to go into like figuring out, well, what is our bodily terrain, what is it that feels good to myself, then it's going to be much more difficult to actually have something that you feel comfortable expressing with others. And if you then end up repressing it on top of that, it is going to either come out sideways, meaning that, and the distortion typically is that you become very neutered, and so then you disconnect from your body, and there's a whole bunch of health consequences that come from that as you give up on this kind of vivacious side of yourself, but also too, just in terms of the amount of attractiveness that you have towards others, you're putting out a different frequency. So in some sense, it's the ability, it's like if your body is a musical instrument, you need to be able to learn how to tune yourself before you'd ever think about playing within an orchestra. And so this is something that then you learn to figure out with your own body. And as you start to become comfortable with, okay, there are areas that maybe you have some shame around, some areas that you might be afraid of, or even a lot of times anger can be there as well from past pains. Or the other big one is that, you know what, I'm sick of this whole thing. I'm sick of Tinder. I'm done with dating. I just want to focus on my business. And so I'm going to allow myself to go numb because I'm frankly bored with this whole rat race. And so how the key is not to avoid these emotions. You're going to be confronted with them, but how do you start to change boredom and numbness into sensation and excitation? And a lot of the keys when you start changing things like shame to connection, or fear to calmness, and anger to bliss, is the missing component is that we can understand it in our heads. We can go through a conversation with a friend or a therapist, but until we have a different imprint in our body, given an environment and situation that has a tendency to trigger that negative emotion, and then we can divert it or transmute it into something positive, then we won't get out of that old emotional cycle. But the benefit and the great thing is that once the body does connect towards something that is an alternative and there is a pleasurable outcome, very quickly we go with that and then start to condition ourselves again, like I said earlier, so that we're not trying to avoid the fear, avoid the pain, avoid the boredom, or avoid the shame, but instead we're motivated towards what are the best ways in any situation in life can I create more joy and bliss? Can I create more relaxation and calm, more calmness and intimacy, and more excitation and discovery around oneself, but as well as the other person? And then we break outside of this kind of individualistic bubble of needing to fulfill everything in our side ourselves, which is very important. And this is something that I think in Denmark is very strong, is this individualism. But we need to also be able to then go and how do we as a community create intimacy and connection. And I think this is also something that Denmark does very well, is learning to work in groups. But learning to work in groups in this way from a place of embodiment, a place of using your heart, and a place where your sexuality is invited in, but it's not hijacking you. Instead, this is what it's kind of like the coffee in your morning. You feel excited, you feel turned on about life, and then it doesn't have to always go towards sex. And if it does go towards sex, you can then use that energy to then go into the things that you want to, so it doesn't distract you from your work, it doesn't take you away from your goals. And then what ends up happening is that if your own sexual practice doesn't do that, then all of a sudden you have the opportunity to have a relationship that doesn't distract you as well, but also further drives you in that direction, because you're used to relating to yourself in a way where sex isn't the distraction, but again, pleasure is the meditation for your inspiration.
I just love you so much. Because it's because what I love about it is this connecting sexuality to so much more, to
Yes.
to the wholeness. And I think that's what's been missing, and that's why I'm so really truly fond of both of you, because I really feel you stick totally out on the global market. About there's so much so many experts right now, but I love that you relate it to the whole. It is not just local, and I think this is so important, because as long as it's local, it becomes a special interest that you have to pursue. But would you like you make it about life and expansion,
like
and
nutrition,
about
exercise.
Exactly.
It's part of a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I wanted just to add a couple words on this, because you said, like, how do we deal with all the fear and the shutdown? And so one of the missions that we have is not only to bring back art and beauty to sexuality, but also playfulness.
Yes.
And it's really important as adults we remember how to play, and playfulness brings out joy. And joy, as a ancient practice of cultivating the heart, joy is it's unreasonable, meaning it doesn't need a reason to exist. And we need to come back into that state where we relax the heart, where we can access natural joy that doesn't have a particular reason for existing, but it's just bubbling over. And that kind of joyfulness then creates that playfulness. And that playfulness is a healing salve for fear, because if we approach something with curiosity, erotic innocence, we could say, then that fear can just very gently start to transform itself and create something very beautiful. I've seen it over and over again, Kristen, like thousands and thousands of times, turning our attention toward that which is uncomfortable in ourselves, opening our hearts and having some compassion, using actual body mechanics. So deepening the breath, modulating the nervous system out of heightened stress states into more relaxation, pleasure states intentionally, so that relaxed arousal place. As we learn to do that through the body, the fear does transform. But fear won't transform if we try and deal with it just with the mind. Fear, like, in order to alchemize and become a fuel, must be dealt with through the body, through the breath, through movement, and also through this curiosity.
Well, this is also really, I love that you bring this up about the fear and the need for curiosity, because one of the parts that's missing in our sexual education is that it is right now predominantly functional, meaning it's about, Can you reproduce? Can you menstruate? Can you urinate? And there isn't anything really about pleasure. And so it remains something that's hidden from our general knowledge. And so anything that's hidden is more likely to have a lot of fear around it. And even the female anatomy is vastly internal, and it is one of the parts in medicine that has been completely overlooked from a pleasure perspective. And frankly, even for men, which is all about can they get an erection and ejaculate, again, the pleasure perspective is completely forgone. I mean, just recently now, I think in most modern day sex educations, they'll talk about self-pleasuring as something that's good, but they still don't talk about how to do it. And so most people then associate self-pleasuring with pornography, with a distraction, as opposed to, again, how can this be a meditation that I get deeply in tune with myself, and then share this with the partner that then becomes a joint meditation that drives us towards our goals, as opposed to how we used to kind of individually practice as something that we would hide away and do very quickly and not really want to talk to people about. So of course there isn't going to be much of a conversation with others if we can't even have that conversation with ourselves, because we can't have that conversation from a place that's embodied. And by embodiment, I mean that there are some very basic practices, and this is why we created these two programs, and just understanding, well, what is the treasure map of your body? How is it an actual pleasure system and not bits of anatomy? So there's a deep focus on understanding anatomy as a functional tool by which then you can understand your partner's pleasure better as well as your own. And then we get very practical on how to use your hands, how to use your mouth, and how to use your genitals, so that the embodiment is actually showing the interaction of love. We talk about love, we talk about intimacy, and you can go to different types of events and retreats to learn how to eye gaze and breathe. But when it actually comes to the act of penetration or even foreplay, we don't have the embodied knowledge to often convey the very feelings that we wish to have. And so we either end up being super rough, or we end up being like very kind of romance, candles and lights, but nothing that actually gets the body physically excited. And then a lot of times we end up having these relationships that are like really great sex, but really unhealthy dynamics, or a great dynamic, but then they end up becoming our friend and there's no actual charge there. So there's no eros to drive. And so I think, again, we have this division between eros and being satisfied. And what we're doing through embodiment and in these very practical practices is how can you synchronize your bodies, synchronize your intentions, and then from there build up the arousal. So that way it's almost like a dance. There's crescendos, there's times when it goes down, there's pauses, but everything is very fresh, it's very new, and it stays interesting because you're not doing the routine, but instead it's about getting in synchronicity with each other and then dancing and really having sex become your meditation, become your prayer towards life.
Hallelujah. I wanted to talk about your programs because I think that they really stick out from everything else I've seen. But I also just want to mention before that I think there's also this third category of couples who've been together for a long time. Yes. I used to be in a couplehood that was lasting for 25 years, and it's just eroticism is what keeps a couple together. I mean, it what makes us a couple rather than just two friends. So it's really important to renew that, and I think what you offer is really a gift in terms of a renewal of that energy and upgrading of that intimacy. Yes. So it's not just staying on the same level, but it keeps evolving. Yes. So you have created programs that are completely, for me, I've never seen anything like it. It's completely unique, and it's I almost ordered the second one because I saw the first one and I said, can you make a second one for women? Because it's like you say, a lot of you can go to courses and learn about the energy, the tantric, way of exchanging energy, and you can go to relational therapy, and you can probably also go to swingers clubs, and there's like a whole, you can explore different alleys, but this is very holistic, and it's very practical and very hands. I mean, literally hands-on. And I think it's useful for everyone. I think it should be in the school curriculums, in business curriculums. I want to include it in my leadership trainings as an extra offer, because I think it's so useful. But also I want to say, for all our young people, it's really a heavenly gift, because all the young people are so, of course, they're embarking on this journey, and they have no idea how to go about it. And so porn is usually what educates them. And porn today is, not that I watch, not that I know a lot about it, but it's my impression that it's more and more disconnected from heart, and that's a big it's a really big evolutionary problem when we disconnect sexuality from heart, because heart is this is what connects us as a species, and this is what will this is the most important organ in the future, the heart. So I really want to say to everybody who's listening to this is a program. If you don't buy it for yourself, you have to buy it for your teenager, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, because it's direct. We wanted to make something very direct and clear and incredibly practical. So even just the video on pleasure anatomy, where everything's a system of pleasure, not these separate parts. When you just understand some basics on, well, what is arousal, what is engorgement, how does that work in the body, how do we heighten, how do we actually calm down to maintain a really nice relaxed arousal, just that is a treasure map for people. We've had couples and singles as young as early 20s all the way up into their mid 70s do this work. We've had people who are virgins. We've had very experienced, maybe more playful types that have tried everything. And everyone across the board has commented on how clear and practical and fun, and they're learning things. And the best part, though, Kirsten, is they're getting the results, meaning more pleasure and more self-confidence, more relaxation, and more connection. And so for me as an advocate, it's mostly Erin's programs. I step in as a psychologist to kind of give a perspective, but I had also never seen anything like this anywhere. And that's why I've kind of put my full energy behind it, just because I just feel this information needs to be in everyone's hands. And as soon as someone's willing to consider being sexual, this is a crucial education for them. Or wherever, as you said, there are many stages to our evolution. Sometimes we're alone, sometimes we're in relationships, sometimes up, down. Still, this knowledge is really, really important because it's an empowerment.
Some of the pieces that I really enjoyed about this course is that, one, not only becoming self-responsible or understanding how our own physical arousal works, and then being able to share that with another person, plus understanding how their system works. So that way it's not kind of like this exchange of it's your pleasure or my pleasure, but how do our bodies come together and complement each other in such a way that it actually becomes more than the whole, becomes more than the sum parts. But we go into actually how do we in the same way become responsible for our own mental arousal. And I think this is something that especially plagues a lot of relationships that have been together for, the 7 plus 10, 20 plus years, where you end up getting into a routine. And this is what then starts to become boring, because you're used to the same kind of maybe physical thing, or maybe it's the same emotional dynamic that ends up happening with it. And you're just not that thrilled. But all of a sudden, when you start to learn, okay, well, I can in the same way, not just be focused on needing to have those early days where the physical arousal was so much because everything was new about the person. So there's a ton of mental desire, but how can I actually start to bring back that mental desire towards my partner, which is going to make me more curious about them, going to make me more explorative with them and myself. And then this brings a whole new spring into your relationship, which then cascades into creating more physical arousal, more mental arousal, and more synergy within the relationship, so that there is that kind of rejuvenescence of energy and freshness, where we've seen couples that have been together for many years, where maybe the guy's struggling with premature ejaculation, maybe the woman's struggling with anorgasmia, or they're just not much spice and they're going through the day-to-day routine to pay bills, deal with kids, or even, kids have moved out, but it's just, well, we've kind of retired now or we're getting ready to, but what do we do with each other? Because we're just looking externally as opposed to figuring out the solutions on the inside. And a lot of it, again, comes because, well, if our education predominantly, if we've seen sex happen the most times, even more than we've experienced it ourselves, on a screen by actors who are doing different types of embodiment for a camera to capture versus what feels good in their own bodies, then of course what we're going to reflect and bring into the bedroom unconsciously is an act for something that looks good on the outside as opposed to how does this feel from the inside. And so a lot of these practices are going to have a lot of interoceptive awareness, meaning feeling yourself from the inside, understanding how the other person works from the inside, and then interacting from that place of knowledge. All of a sudden, as opposed to having to learn 101 different little techniques to do this and that you have to memorize, you learn a system which is basically that teaches you how to follow your pleasure, and then it makes everything very intuitive and simple. And we're just giving tips to try this, this, and that. And before you know it, you have a very robust toolbox that can deal with things like pain, that can deal with things like shame, that can deal with anxiety in a way that both helps you to deal with it inside yourself, but also how to recognize and help your partner come through it. So that, again, you're creating this complementary, holistic kind of relationship that can really overcome all sorts of obstacles, and more importantly, overcome the greatest obstacle, which is allowing yourself to step into the things that you deserve in life, to step towards the things that you want and that which actually feels good.
I think what you're talking about, or I feel that what you're talking about is actually the new humanity.
Yes.
It's like this is we are in the potential of a new human being, new way of being human, and this, what you're teaching here, is essential for that human being.
Yes.
Out of the head and into the rest of us. It's like we've used such a small part of ourselves.
Exactly.
Until
it's
now.
Untapped. It's literally, and for thousands of years, very specific lineage have understood that this is our most untapped human resource. But modern people don't have the time, energy, wherewithal to go and embark on a deep lineage journey. A few do, but the majority do not. So how do we get there? The wisdom that we're sharing is a culmination of a lot of years of our own personal experience and training and trying to make it realistic. So in a 5-minute video, you literally can learn a skill that can create more connection and pleasure and joy. So we're trying to make it very easy and digestible for the everyday person. And again, if you're not in a couple and you're out on a date, you can make that an extraordinary date and leave both of you feeling more amazing, whether or not there's a continuation post that date. So there's a graciousness and a generosity that we can bring to the act of sensuality, intimacy, and sexuality.
Because we have a little more time, I'd like to hear your take on how erotic intelligence and spiritual intelligence is connected. Can you talk about that? Because I think that spiritual intelligence, both of them are what we have repressed in leadership. So erotic intelligence, zip, don't talk about it, be ashamed, or let it out in distorted ways, or don't use it. And spiritual intelligence has we're a little bit ashamed about that as well. You know, at least here in the northern part of Europe, and also, I mean, in the West. Is that because, again, that's an area where it's an untapped resource for sure, but it's also, it's an area that has been so distorted by religion, by dogma, by abuse of manipulation of people's thought forms. So we are really on alert when it comes to spirituality. also because it comes in, just like sexuality, comes in so many different forms, some more healthy than others.
Yes.
So it's two areas, two essential untapped resources that we have just put a lid on because that's easier, then we don't have to deal with it. But again, it limits our human potential to like such a small, we just get so much smaller, and we can't afford that, because in order to solve the problems we face, we need to become our whole selves. So and I do think one evolutionary step forward I've seen is that the interest, is there increased interest in coupling sexuality with spirituality, so an increased interest in tantric practice and so on. But how do you see it? Because I'd love to hear from you, because you see things so differently than so many other experts in your field. So how do you relate sexuality or erotic intelligence, aliveness, with spiritual intelligence?
You want to go first?
Sure. Well, some of the things are, I think we like to create kind of a dualistic perspective. We have a separation of mind and body. The cognitive sciences now have quite clearly shown that the mind is embodied, meaning that the body and the psyche are what make up the mind, make up who we are as a whole, and our sexuality is a deep part of that. Now, in the same sense as well, we also have a tendency to separate spirituality and the body. And so when you create a rift between these two things, then of course sexuality is going to go with the body. And so you have a lot of kind of bypassing our own bodies in order to achieve this sort of idea of spiritual enlightenment. And a lot of times, and you can see this kind of with some of like the versions of white tantra, which is, there'll be no contact. We can actually go more energetically deep if we try and eliminate some of the sexual aspects of it. And that's not saying that this is how traditional white tantra or anything like that has been taught. I don't want to go into that aspect of it. But what I want to talk about, though, is how is it that, as opposed to our body being a distraction from our spirituality, how can we start to really begin to bring these two together? And if we look at, especially within a lot of the spiritual mystic paths, it isn't just by book reading that you gain these knowledge, but gnosis comes through experience. So you need to have a lot of embodied practices. There is a reason why there's a lot of traditions where a spiritual guru or someone will go out into the wilderness and have a fast for a period of time, going without water or going without food. Well, in the same way, though, a lot of these practices aren't just about denying oneself, but also how do we do these embodied practices in a way that consider ourselves. So as opposed to maybe the old way, which was, well, I'm going to be very spiritual, so I'm going to deny myself good nutrition. I'm just going to eat very stoically with just water and bread. Instead, how can I actually learn from the environment around me and actually nourish myself with the rich bounty of all the variety of fruits that are there to have the best nourishment in my body? And instead of a practice of self-denial, is of educated, well-versed nutrition and understanding sex in the same way as stepping away from, I'm just going to deny my sexuality. Instead, I'm going to understand it and harness it. So some of these practices that can end up happening is something very simple. We have an image of, well, sex is a bit of a distraction. So when we get the itch, we have sex, or we grab the vibrator, or we get in front of the porn, and then we relieve ourselves of the energy. And then we go, oh, okay, I'm back at like the kind of status marker where I was, because before I was feeling agitated. It's similar to if when you first start to exercise, it's not necessarily going to, you're kind of like, oh, my body feels sore. But once you've been exercising for a while and then you don't go to the gym, you can feel your body's kind of like gets this itch inside itself to want to like go back into the gym. Now, as opposed to then going to the gym, maybe we just eat some junk food and get that itch to go away, and then we don't go to the gym. Well, what's going to happen is eventually our body's going to not go into the healthy ways that we would like to be able to take it. Now, instead, if you're doing this with your sexuality, that you don't see it as just an itch, but this is actually an energy store that's growing inside yourself. And how can you begin to cultivate it in a way that is healthy and not just a release? I mean, people understand with mindfulness, they understand with exercise, they understand with nutrition that you don't just do this for 5 minutes and expect to then have these results. Yet our average sex lasts around, I think it's 5 minutes and 20 seconds or so. Most people say between 15 to 25 minutes, they don't want to have more sex because it ends up being painful or numbing them out. Well, how is it that we can then enter into these deeper meditative, rejuvenating, trance-like states that actually nourish our body in the same way with exercise or in the same way with meditation, if we can't even begin to allow ourselves to feel more pleasure than just the quick release that happens from putting a vibrator on one's clitoris and having this orgasm, or for a man just wanting to ejaculate as soon as possible and then rolling away from each other. Instead, how do we start to actually share this in a way that then sex and time and the state of your mind, as well as the state of your psyche and your body, start to shift into new patterns? But you need to be able to stay in sync with one another and literally be able to start to extend those time periods, because the true pleasure doesn't come from the relief after just having had an orgasm where then you're like, don't want to move. It's all that pleasure that happens before it. How can we start to harness that and hold on to that, so that way each time we go into a sexual experience, we actually are left wanting more, as opposed to just feeling kind of engorged by it? And then how can we take that energy of wanting more and actually use it into like our own professional life? And so when we start to practice sex as something that isn't just something to get a relief, but it's actually a meditative state that you start to nurture between yourself and your partner, or even within your own self, then all of a sudden sex takes on a different significance. It takes on a different embodiment that then allows for the long-term relationship not to always end with the loss of romance, but instead a forever passion that can be cultivated and grown deeper, that actually starts to spread out and permeates other aspects of our life.
Beautiful.
I wanted to add a little something to that. Thank you. It's so important, this conversation. So first, my gratitude, Kirsten, for opening this up.
Yes.
It's like immense. Thank you. I would say, to answer the question around, spirituality, eroticism, how do they come together? The body is actually designed for this. There's literally they've mapped centers in the brain that light up when you enter a transcendent state. We have hormones at the pineal pituitary glands. These hormones, there's DMT that is produced in the body. So we have the God hormones in the system. And some of the deeper trainings I've done, you have to harness the aliveness of the body so that you're very deeply relaxed, but very aroused. So you're not asleep. And when you do that, you can enter these very clear, connected, transcendent spaces. That is kind of like a spiritual connection. It's not associated with a guru or a specific god or a specific ritual. It is the ability of one single human being to feel at one with all that is through their own biochemistry. This is incredible. And so the beginner step to this is paying attention to where your attention is. This is the first level of practice. Where are you putting your attention? We say pay attention, like we're literally investing our attention. So if we want to have that more synergistic, right relationship type of livelihood, that in all areas of our life, our leadership is clear and connected and enable everything around us to thrive more, it's about how we pay attention. So the cultivation of attention is very important. So step one, are you able to move your attention inwardly and just feel? Our sensuality is how we make sense of reality. End of story. So harness your sensuality. You'll make much more sense of what's going on. Then you'll be on the leading edge because you're going to be more attuned. A person who's more attuned is getting innovative ideas, is suddenly understanding, oh, I need to talk to this person or connect over here or do this thing. And it's random, but it's not random. People from the outside are like, wow, you're so lucky, you're so gifted. No, I'm not. I'm just connected to myself and to life. That is the spiritual erotic path. And that's available to every single human being because that is the human potential. And essentially, that's what we're inviting people into through learning let's just start with the basics. Let's just get comfortable with paying attention for a moment to something we call pleasure and body, and understand it in a beautiful way. And so really that's the message that we wanted to bring to you, to your community, and our desire to the world.
And I'm so grateful you do, because I think you both embody, you're both such role models for who can you become when you harness your full potential. And I think it's quite remarkable how eloquent both of you are, and what a broad perspective you have on things. You really can both zoom in and zoom out. And I think this is the capacity of the new human, that we can see how everything is related and connected, and we don't just separate sexuality from spirituality, from work, from family. It's all connected, and I think that's the new human being, and you embody that so well. So I will say to both you and my listeners that I have studied with both of you, and I'm definitely going to continue. And if anybody wants to join me, I invite them on this call to join me in furthering our, taking advantage of your pioneering work. I mean, I've known Saida, I've known you for years, and Aaron, I've known you for a couple of years, and I know how you are the most dedicated people on the planet to this cause. I mean, you are unstoppable, relentless. You keep exploring from morning to midnight. That's what you do. I mean, it's beyond extraordinary. You are so dedicated. I've never met anybody with your level of dedication in this field. So I want to thank you for never stopping, for not being discouraged by the world not being ready. And I am sure that the world is waking up to this need now. So I think you'll be very busy for the next 20 years. So it's good that you stay ageless, because you will need it. Yeah. But again, you show what that juice is able to, it's a vital juice in our system that keeps us forever young. I mean, maybe it's our most potent anti-age tool, or not anti-age, not because there's anything wrong with aging, but it's just wonderful to age with more and more vitality.
Yes.
And more passion, and to explore that passion. So if some of my listeners, or somebody who's listening to this, is considering, well, where should I go to learn more and study more? I mean, I would say you are definitely a very blessed choice. Yeah, very blessed. And we're doing this. I would like to invite everybody to listen to this interview at any point, but we are now a month away from your arrival in Denmark. I think you'll be in Denmark in a month's time. So if anybody wants to take advantage of that, please contact me. And I also think you have something we can already take advantage of right now, right? You have an online offer or something, a special offer you can give the listeners for this particular interview. So please go ahead. And where can we start if we want to work with you?
Well, we'll put the links in the bottom, but we have 2 free courses that are kind of what would be the basics to being able to embody creating more pleasure inside your partner, while at the same time having a tremendous amount of pleasure yourself. So it's not you sacrificing pleasure to try and make someone else feel good, but instead learning how their body works in a way that can work with yours. And so those videos are ones made for a set of 4 videos made for men, and a set of 4 videos made for women. And they follow that exact structure of the course, which is anatomy, hand skills, mouth skills, and genitals. Very basic, practical information that is, I guarantee you, something you haven't seen before, and is really going to have a lot of immediate impact. People who, before even getting into the course, just doing these 4 videos, it transformed, 15 years of poor sexual relating. And the women's course then is nearly 100 videos long. It is going to have a bonus of different trainings actually that Saida has never shown before, how to use a dildo to actually train oneself to become more powerful, videos on how to remove pain, how to become not just moving from anorgasmia to orgasm, but actually learning to expand one's orgasm, to have different types of orgasms, to feel more sensation. And then it walks through like all of the anatomy of how to interact with yourself and the man's anatomy, then when you are in bed, if you're using how to move to create different angles, how to be able to surrender, but as well as take pleasure, and to regulate a man's nervous system so that you can both excite him but help him last longer, and how to do that as a woman in a way that isn't going to hurt his ego, how to tell him what it is that you like and want in a way that's invitational, and then how to actually unlock the keys to your own mental arousal and then set up your partner, as opposed to kind of pushing them down because you're frustrated, maybe he's not being manly enough, and so then you emasculate him. Well, how do you actually set him up so that way he starts to become positively conditioned to being more powerful? And then in the same way we do with the men's course, we have that same structure of anatomy, hands, mouth, genitals, and really learning, especially in this one, how it is that without having to do months of meditation and physical training, how can you quickly last as long as you'd like to be able to, while having a partner who'd actually like for you to last longer because it feels so good, and really learning how to get their body to become more active and receptive, and how then to adapt yourself in a way that can both become in sync with their pleasure and then just raise it through the roof and really take someone on an amazing journey. And so the women's course is called Blow His Mind, and the men's course is Be Her Best Ever, as well as your own. And these two courses have been made to complement one another. So if one person is doing the one course and the other partner is doing the other, or even if you're single at this time and then you have another partner that comes in, there's going to be skill sets that really match up, and it's actually put together as well in a language that a lot of guys are going to be receptive to, where it isn't always framed in this super spiritual way, but how do we make it very practical? And then once you have the physical and relational as well as mental experiences, the spiritual aspects become a lot more intuitive, and you will be well motivated from a body perspective and not just an intellectual one.
So fantastic! It's really a gift, and as I said, if you don't buy it for yourself, absolutely give it to your young people. It's like yeah.
Well, and one of the other things that we're doing as well is that as we travel around the world, we are taking applications for bespoke clients, for those that really want to go to that next level and would like to work with our plus 50 years of joined knowledge to either help oneself out with any array of issues that can come up, from either dysfunction to optimization on an individual level, as well as the interpersonal relational level as well.
And also you sometimes give live workshops, right?
Yes. So
can you talk about what we do in those?
Yeah, so our play shops are fun. They're experiential. They're putting into action a lot of the concepts. So you'll learn some of the basic same things as the course, but now you're in person. You can ask questions. It's more dynamic. You can get some coaching. It's a lot of fun. It's clothes on. It's safe. A lot of joy, a lot of curiosity, and it's just very dynamic, and we respond to the groups. So though we have like a set curriculum, it really depends what the group shows up with and what their desires are, and we create on the spot really great experiences for people to feel more at home in their erotic nature, in intimacy, and in the playfulness that can emerge when we can relax together.
Yes, and we help people chart out the waters of their mental arousal as well as their physical arousal. We allow them to go into different experiences that maybe they would need a safer container around within which to do that, and then to be able to navigate any kind of confrontations they might have around the pleasure and pain that can come from these experiences, and how to be able to then well communicate that to other people, as well as becoming quite understanding of what's happening inside of oneself. And then from there, these kind of experiences really bring that embodied experience that then creates the pattern interrupt of things from the past. And then quite quickly, people start to, just like when your musical instrument becomes in tune, it sends out a different resonance, and other instruments with that same resonance are going to respond. And that's actually how we then start to become attractive, as opposed to having to, do different techniques to attract and bring people in. So again, these workshops create very powerful shifts in compressed periods of time, with then the ability to integrate that into one's life for a continued effect. So you don't just have the spike at the workshop, but we'll be doing things that prep you beforehand and that also help you with the integration after, because that's really the purpose, is how, once you've left that workshop space, do you then begin to install this in your own personal life and relationship on an everyday basis.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your work and for your offerings, and I'll definitely keep my crowd posted on what you do. And I also invite them to follow you directly, because it's easier to follow you that way. And definitely check out your offers. I mean, it's stupid to not to, because you made it so easy for all of us.
I'm looking forward to everyone here who is a leader, that your leadership becomes even more magnetic, even more charged, even more inspired and generative, because you are more connected to your pleasure and to yourself, and actually life as a greater lover, so a lovership with life.
Well, I also just really want to thank you, Kirsten, as well, because of the community that you're bringing together. I think is so well positioned in the world. I mean, the Scandinavian countries and Denmark hold a lot of attention of the world already looking at new ways of having leadership, at new models of structuring more egalitarian structures for leadership and power and the ability to actually make progress together. And I think that the people that you are speaking to, your community, are particularly well positioned to have the setup in life to then start to invest in this aspect of their life and then carry that out and really have it trickle down into other leaders who are looking for leadership from a place like Denmark. So I just really want to both congratulate but also encourage that you and your mission of bringing such a rich and powerful understanding of leadership, not just in terms of red and black and the numbers adding up right on a spreadsheet, but a business plan that goes beyond the business, but one that actually incorporates life holistically, family, relations, and proper health. And I think that that is something that you're doing, and I really want to support you in that. And so my greatest desire would be that these kind of gifts only further enrich your leaders, and that they can bring this joy into the workspace, which I think is so drastically needed, because that's what's going to create the right kind of decisions that are going to influence us from that proper conditioning towards what we want and the things that we actually work for and can then accept and deserve. So thank you again.
Absolutely, and I'm so happy I'm so grateful you can see that's actually my mission. You know, I love when leaders step up and embody more of the 21st century leadership.
Yes.
That has such a ripple effect, and they get so much better organizations. It's a good deal for everybody. People benefit in themselves, at home, in their relationships with their children, and at work, and they could create just much. It's so different. It's on such a higher level, and it's a positive ripple effect for all. So thank you for seeing that, and thank you so much for contributing to that. So definitely, the leaders in my crowd, they will not be allowed to forget this conversation and to act on it. So thank you so much, and everybody, just check out these offers, because I would say it's something you can't refuse. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.